Excellent. So we are live streaming, and I want to encourage viewers to go ahead and submit comments or questions for the panel. There is a button below the live stream on our website that you can do that. We have received a question, which was if any of the weavers had hand-woven gnomes for sale this year, and I happen to know that there are some in the house. So Chenille and Richard, could you show us your gnomes?
Here is one example. This is done by a woman that actually helps us weave in the studio. Her name is Jerry Favreau, and she is selling them through our shop. She's using all scraps from our fabrics that we make. Even the faux fur beard is from some of the trim that we use, some old vintage buttons, etc. So we have this one, more neutral with a yellow cap. That's one of our tweed fabrics.
And one of my favorites that has a nice plaid fabric on it that almost matches my shirt that I'm wearing today.
And if the customer's interested, get in touch at our shop, and our phone number's on our website and so forth.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so I'd like to start the discussion today by talking about looms. I know this group in particular has some interesting and unusual looms. So Chenille and Richard, let's start with you. What type of looms do you weave on?
We have a fleet of Makumber looms, which are made in Maine and are widely used in colleges and universities and in some professional studios around the world. And it's a very small family company. The advantages of these looms are they're very sturdy. They have a combination of wood and metal parts, and they're fixable.
My history in the New York City garment industry kind of introduced me to Makumbers way back when, because I was, a hobby weaver with a Leclerc and a couple of, I had a beautiful Berga Ullman at one point, which was a Contre-Marche. But once we got into actually trying to make a living as weavers, we needed something that could, number one, be a real workhorse and get beat up on a daily basis, because we really put the looms through their paces on a daily basis. And it had to be a company that could replace parts as needed and so forth. So we ended up going with Makumbers just because we were used to it, and it's been a good choice for us over the years.
And I'll add, it's all hands and feet operated. We don't have any additional help from computers or.
We're too old to be learning.
Excellent. Okay, Stephanie, let's talk about your fleet of looms.
Okay, I love Makumbers too, Richard and Cecilia. They're great, and I have three that I weave rugs on. And also blankets. And then I've been really fortunate because people have given me looms. And I have a J-Made, a 60-inch wide J-Made that someone gave me. It's an absolutely beautiful loom. Sturdy, it can weave rugs, it can weave fabric. I'm doing blankets on it right now. And then I have a 1720s loom. I love that one. It's an old barn frame loom that I got in Connecticut. And I have a Clement that is 9 feet. Yeah, it's a 9 foot wide width. So I weave together. It's a tandem loom. I have two tandem looms. And I like to weave with other people. So because both of them have two sets of treadles, you need to weave with another weaver. So on the Clement, which is made in Canada, I weave with another weaver and two shuttle throwers, and we weave cut a loin together, rag coverlets we weave together. And then my big Glimokra is actually the only import not from North America, it's from Sweden, Glimokra. It's 11 foot wide weaving width, and I weave really large, heavy duty looms on that. It's a monster. I call it Papa Bear. I bought it from a weaver who named it Papa Bear, so he continues to be Papa Bear.
I love it. And Roy, I see you at your loom. Is that a Swedish loom?
It is. It's a Glamocra. It's probably the offspring of Stephanie's. It's only 46 inches or 140 centimeters wide. And it makes everything that I need to make as wide as I go. I have, however, learned how to double the width of an item by weaving 4 levels at once. It's called double weave. It's a form of double weave, and I learned it. So you weave 2 levels up here, 2 levels down here.
Oh.
You join it on one side and you leave the other side open. And when you're finished, you open up and you have a 5-foot wide blanket that you give to your grandson, who, when he gets older, will appreciate it.
Wonderful.
The interesting thing about a Glamocra, the one I bought is called a countermarch. And I don't know if you can appreciate, we really can appreciate it up here, but in order to tell which shaft to go up and which shaft to go down, you have pedals on the floor. And in the majority of looms, when you push on a pedal, it'll either tell the yarn to go up and you throw your yarn under it and hide it, or it'll tell a yarn to go down and you throw your yarn across to show. So it's either an upgoing or a downgoing shaft to move the yarn. However, in this one, a countermarch, you hook it up underneath with a series of very complicated ropes. And when you've done it correctly and you step on a pedal, some threads go up and some threads go down. That's the advantage of a countermarch. It allows me to throw something thicker through it. And it's an interesting concept. When I bought the loom, I had tried it out first at a studio for a week. And I should have known then that you need a good set of knees to get down. You have to climb into the loom, literally climb into it, and set it up so that you have all of the accoutrements that you need to set it up. And you're down there for about an hour. Then you come out, you try it out, you see whether you've set it up correctly. And if not, you take a break and you go back again. That's a countermarch loom.
Yes, I think my next loom is going to be a countermarch. I really like the action. And I think particularly, weaving, I have noticed, is a craft that many people carry on as they age, right? And that kind of loom is much easier on your knees than a traditional North American jack loom, where you're really, the weight of the loom is really on your knees.
Yeah, you don't really need a lot of power to press the pedals, but you need good knees to climb up the loom. Just remember that.
That's why we're all training young weavers, so they can do the work for us later.
Absolutely. We have a couple of rug weavers here, and I want to talk about how rug weaving is different from other types of weaving. So Roy or Stephanie, do you have any comments on that?
I do. I think of rug weaving more as rug constructing than weaving, because it's so long, and it's a much slower process laying in and designing. I design sometimes as I go along. And so it is not the kind of thing where you can throw a shuttle back and forth. I really admire people who do that, but I just can't in rug weaving. Roy, do you find that too? It's more like construction.
Right. You design much of it as you go.
Right.
You can't really draw it up ahead of time efficiently. And I have one with me. I have one sitting here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there are 2 forms of rugs. I mean, basically 2 forms of rugs. One where the design goes front back. That's called a warp-faced rug. And for that, you have incredibly large amounts of wool going front to back. And when you step on those pedals, you have to separate them. And there's some physics involved, which I learned about from one of the videos, that if your room is humid, and that the wool sticks to itself so much that you cannot actually step on the pedal and separate them, so that you have to do this in dry weather or have a fan going.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So here's an example of a front back rug like that.
Oh, beautiful.
Beautiful.
Okay. So, and then the other kind are the side to side or weft faced rugs, which are easier to deal with and in terms of separating them out, because you only have linen going front and back, which hides underneath the side to side wool.
Right.
So those are simpler to do, but they take incredibly long to accomplish.
Yes. Mhm.
Certain looms are better suited than others to rug weaving, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I was told that I need a sturdy loom to do a rug that a standard floor loom might not hold up with, because you have to really bang hard to press down the wool. The wool doesn't want to press itself down, so you have to really bang hard. And so, because if you get a sturdy loom like a Makumber, I'm told they're really sturdy, or one of the Swedish looms, they're sturdy enough that you can bang and not wreck the loom. But it's interesting because the loom that I have, and I think others, they come with feet, that rubber feet that you put underneath the legs.
Right.
When I first started, I didn't have the feet, and I wound up starting the rug at one end of the room, and by the end of the rug, I was at the other end.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
It literally
And
literally walks across the room.
Yeah.
my big Glimokra, which weighs about 2,000 pounds, I managed to walk it 12 inches in about 9 months and walked forward from the beating, because the beater in my big Glimokra weighs, it's 150 to 200 pounds. All I have to do is swing it and it does the beating for me, which is what I love about it. It's wonderful. The other thing about rug weaving and why your loom has to be sturdy is that there's so much tension. You have to make your warp very, very tight. In my Glimokra, it has steel girders for the cross beams. And the Makumbers are, I think, Cecilia, Richard, are they rock maple? They're a very
Yes.
strong maple. And so they will never crack, but you could conceivably crack a Leclerc if you were to warp it as tight as I warp anyway.
Well, just look at it this way, Stephanie, like with your loom, when you go to the gym, you only have to do lower body exercises because you've already done that on the loom.
That's right.
Everybody.
I do a lot of walking back and forth between the treadles.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about weaving for garments. Cecilia and Richard, you are longtime professional weavers with your own clothing line. What are some of the challenges of sewing hand-woven fabric versus commercial fabric?
Widgy is one word that springs to mind. The fabric does not behave in a very stable fashion all the time, even if you are pounding the heck out of your beater and weaving very tightly. Commercial fabrics simply perform better under the requirements of sewing. And so it takes special care and a little technical adjustment to be able to sew
Also a machine,
fabric.
a marrow.
Yes,
Your best friend.
go
I
ahead.
was gonna say your best friend as a weaver is a good serger. We have an old-fashioned Juki marrow machine from probably the 50s or 60s. And it took us a long time to find the right one because the marrow machine does a little lock stitch on the edge. So it like a little zigzag, and it has to be heavy duty enough so that the whole edging doesn't just pull off, which a lot of more machines that are better for home sewers tend to do. So if you're a weaver and you're looking to really stabilize your fabric before making garments, shop around for a good serger, a good heavy duty serger. That would be number one tip. And then we interface a lot. We have 3 or 4 different types of interfacing, from relatively thick to very drapey. What do you call that one that you use? The tricot?
Yes, a very lightweight tricot. that is a fusible interfacing. And it can give some stability, but not, it doesn't really isolate the fibers the way some of the heavier ones do. But the advantage is that you have a wonderful drape to the fabric, which is very important too. I would say one important detail you have to get over is the fear of cutting your fabric. And we
Yeah.
cut our fabric all the time, and we have absolutely no regrets about doing so.
Well,
I absolutely have that fear.
once you
too.
start, you know what, you just get more confidence as you go on. Of course, you know, measure twice, cut once, right? You still have to remember that. But generally speaking, you know, unless you're doing a real throwback, you know, hippie style drop shoulder, squared off garment, we all have to have a rounded armhole. I mean, that's just the way we're built. We're not built as you know, cubical beings. We all have curves. And so if you want a garment to fit correctly, curves are very important, and curves mean cutting your fabric. We can't just build on rectangles. So we've learned over the years, but I'll tell you something funny, and I don't know if it's because fashion is kind of changing or if it's because we just don't want to deal with all the fancy tailoring that we have in the past, is that, you know, rectangles are really fun. I mean, we do a whole line of shawls that are basically a twisted rectangle, and it's such a pleasure not to have to size people. You know, it either fits or it doesn't fit, and it's a one size garment. So those kinds of things are really refreshing to do after a lifetime of you know, very detailed tailoring, which we still enjoy doing, but it does become more tedious as you go along and work with you know, all the custom fitting that we do.
Another aspect of trying to eliminate as much as you can about the widginess of fabric is when you're laying out the fabric, to make sure that you're squaring up everything all the time in all directions. And especially with some of the more complicated weaves that we do, the plaids and the tartans and all kinds of things, you have to make sure that those lines are absolutely perpendicular and parallel and so forth. And if you have a large layout table and take the time to do that, that really saves a lot of effort.
We have those Olfa mats, which have the 1-inch grids on them. That's really helpful. And the other thing we do is we use, our patterns are not the tissue paper patterns. They're actually put on a clear Mylar so that you can look underneath the pattern to make sure everything is lining up. So your grain is along the grain line. And that's really crucial when you're dealing. You can see some of the, I mean, we do a lot of this kind of thing, plaids, and they have to match. I better check to make sure they're matched. That one's not perfect. Anyway, you know, it's very important to have those lines match up, and of course, having a straight grain line when you're dealing with geometric kind of patterns.
Right. So part of the fear of cutting your fabric is the idea of waste, right? This is very precious and you don't want to waste any of it. And I know you two have some really clever ways of using up your scraps. Can you talk about that?
Oh, go grab that poncho collar. Yeah, I actually just had a couple things here just to show. We generate a lot of scraps, and some of them are larger scraps. You know, 6 inches by 5 inches or whatever. So we do a line of tote bags, which is a good way to just, you basically, if you think about scraps as pieces for a small quilt, you can really do a lot of fun items. Just sew them together first and then make the fabric. So that's where the tote bags came from. When we have really tiny scraps, we do a whole line of ponchos with little pieces. These are little, maybe 2 by 2 inch squares turned on their side and sewn together in the corners. So that's another good way to use up little scraps. And then we also do a line of caps, roadster caps, which have, you know, pie-shaped pieces on them. And so those are really good ways to use up small scraps. But yes, we are basically drowning in scraps right now, and we're always looking for new ways to use them. One of my friends said she was going to make me just a huge quilt. And I said, yeah, that'll take up about 0.5% of the scraps. What else you got? So yeah, that's a big challenge. I mean, it's wonderful to have all these fabrics, but at the same time, it's better to get them out there and, figure out, here's a, I think this is one of the door prizes.
Oh, it's so adorable.
Again. So that's tiny little, maybe 4-inch by 2-inch scraps all sewn together in kind of petal shapes. And this is a really cool tie. Richard designed this. Again, he made a quilt, a small quilt, and then cut out a necktie. So those are all little scraps. So
I love it.
we've gotten to be, kind of creative about it. And to tell you the truth, sometimes it's more fun to make an object out of scraps than it is to make, another shirt or another vest or whatever. It's just,
Yeah.
you feel like you have to be more creative about it. So, and it's fun to put all those fabrics together because we have a wealth of inventory as far as, plaids and checks and stripes and solids and different textures. And so that's kind of a creative challenge to make it all work together. So we're good. Here's another quick sample of another shaggy. This is a scarf version. So it's
I
just a
love that.
plain, we just wove a plain scarf and then put a fun little textural border on it.
So we have a question from a viewer named Kim, and her question is, why is it so difficult to find handwoven yard goods for those of us who'd like to sew garments for ourselves? And she did say that the importance of stabilizing handwovens, that was all really good points. So any comments on availability of handwoven yard goods?
They're value added yardages. And for us, the cost of selling fabric by yard would be prohibitive. Whereas if we construct something that's finished and we can sell directly to a customer, it's better for both the customer and for us in terms of being able to continue working and making a living.
Okay. Kim, I do know that Lily Marsh, who is a member of the Guild, does have some handwoven yard goods. So if you check her out, just Google Lily Marsh Weaver. She does not have a profile on the show and sale site, but she is easily findable. And she is actually our 11 a.m. guest. So you can see her a little bit later. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. So every superhero has an origin story. So I'd like to explore your origin stories. How did you get started weaving? And let's start with Stephanie this time. And go ahead and unmute, Stephanie.
Okay. I went to RIT as an art student when I was 18, and I discovered the School for American Craftsmen, and that was it. I wanted to switch, and they wouldn't let me switch the departments. So I switched colleges, and I went to a Quaker college where I traveled to different countries to learn ethnic weaving. And I studied under in apprenticeship systems in Denmark, Norway, Mexico, India, and Nepal. I think that's it. And then after that, I just kept weaving. And I've learned, I've done a lot of classes and, things that I've learned in the United States, but I lived abroad for about 10 years. So a lot of my early experience was, as I said, in other traditions.
Excellent, thank you. How about Roy?
Okay, so I started explaining this before, which was it was my wife that had me helping her set up her loom. But I actually, when I think about it, my interest started probably about 15 years ago when my wife was part of the Guild, and they had a weekend guest doing a workshop. His name was Jason Collingwood. And he had spent 3 days with the Guild in Troy back when the Guild met in Troy. And my wife knew that I was kind of interested in watching her weave, so she said, come to the Guild meeting. So I sat in the audience and I was sort of transfixed by this guy. Number one, he has a British accent, so everything he says sounds great. Secondly, I said, oh, okay, so like guys can do this. And actually, and he made a living doing it. I was not interested in that, but I said, guys can do this, so that's okay. And his rugs are absolutely spectacular. I mean, I can't really do them justice by talking about them. But so he was really the first seed that had me looking into the possibility of doing this. And I was working full time at the time, so I really didn't have a lot of time, but I retired about 4 years ago. And that's when I got into going to classes given in really in the tri-state area. I went to Massachusetts, I went to Vermont. Jason Collingwood would come to the States every year and spend probably up to 6 months teaching. So I went, he's the rug weaver. Yeah. I'm sorry, Peter, the father, Peter, was the guru of rug weaving, and he's no longer with us, but he wrote what's considered to be the Bible of rug weaving. It's Peter Collingwood. This is his son, and he was coming here, and I went to a 3-day workshop at Harrisville, where once again he spoke with a British accent, and he just really was. He taught me things about simple things about rug weaving, and I said, you know, I think I could do this. The other thing that this is just a personal thing, but like as a physician, one of the things that makes good physicians are to be obsessive compulsive and to not let any string hang untaken care of. And if we take that metaphor and move it over to weaving, this is a very obsessive compulsive, I should say obsessive hobby, because you're sometimes taking 800 threads and putting them through 800 holes. And if you make a mistake somewhere along the line, you have to redo them. And you have to do this and still be a good human being and not get angry at the world. So my obsessive nature has been transported to this hobby, and it really works well. I mean, I do not get upset anymore with mistakes because, as my wife taught me, even the best of them make mistakes. So I just redo it and get back to it again. So that's how I really started. It was really my wife asking me to hold the warp so that it could be tight. And I have a new method of doing that. It's called the trapeze, which I mentioned to Megan before we went on the air. And it's a mechanical way of having your warp held tight for you without another pair of hands, because my wife is not always here to help me.
Excellent. How about Cecilia and Richard? What is your origin story?
Do you really want to hear it? I'll try to make it really. I'll try to make it really short. But basically, what I tell people, and I think this is true. I've told this story so often that it must be true. But I remember being in grade school or junior high school, probably, and was reading about Indonesia. You know, we all took geography back then, and so I chose to do a report on Indonesia. And in my research, I saw an incredible picture of this woman at a backstrap loom, and there was something that just clicked, and I showed it to my dad, and he said, you know, I said, can I get this? Can I make this? I don't remember exactly what I asked him, but he said, yeah. He said, you know, he kind of looked at the rigid heddle, and he and I won't tell you how old this is, because then you'll know how old I am, but it's got to be like over 50 years old. Let's put it that way. These are popsicle sticks. And I treasure this. We drill these little holes, and you can see there's slits in between. So this basically acts like a rigid heddle. So when you pull up, half the yarns come down and half the yarns stay in the holes. When you push down, the opposite happens. So you're basically getting over one, under one. So this is how it all started. So be careful, you know, when your kids ask you for a popsicle stick hobby project, it might turn into a career. But at any rate, that is how it started, seriously. And I ended up, you know, just always loving it, never realizing that you could make a career in it. But it was just always something that was with me. I ended up being in the garment center when I graduated college. I didn't major in art. I just thought that was, you know, very like impractical. So I actually majored in theater. Way more practical. Way more practical. I was going to be a scenic designer. I was literally on my way to being a scenic designer. And anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up in the garment center and things just grew, and eventually meeting Richard, and he will tell you his story about the looms. And then we started a business in full-time 1990. So that's how it started.
Excellent.
Take it away.
Well, I grew up in a working class town in Massachusetts. Every town had mills, multiple mills, and all of my ancestors on both sides of the family were weavers, men weavers only, no women, in factories. And the women would carry lunch pails to the men at lunchtime. I ended up working as a teenager in a woolen mill called Packard Woolen Mills in Dudley, Mass. And I hated it. But it gave me spending money as a teenager. And I vowed that I would never get back into a factory setting again, going off to college and so forth. I spent over 20 years as an English teacher and a theater practitioner. And after meeting Cecilia and seeing the trouble she was having with a very flimsy loom, I took my interest in bicycle mechanics and improved with brake cables and derailleur cables, the way that her harnesses were rising and falling and so forth.
I had an old Harrisville with rope pulleys, which, you know, with my crazy treadling, broke constantly. So he would replace all the rope with bike cables, which really worked well. It was amazing.
So of course I got interested myself watching her weaving. And as Roy said, I couldn't resist the temptation to try to figure out how to do it myself. And thereby hangs a tale.
I love it. What I really like about this, Richard, is that you're a connection to an industrial past in the Northeast that is not that far gone, right? Where we really did have
right.
local production of textiles. And
Absolutely.
actually, I did hear that the women were not weavers, but they were often finishers and better paid than the male weavers.
Oh, interesting.
I never saw one woman in the factory I worked in, by the way.
You were in one section.
But one thing I can say about an important woman in my life is that my mother would take the woolen scraps that my father would bring home from work at the mill, and she would weave rag rugs or braided rugs all winter.
Mm-hmm.
And our house was full of those rugs.
Oh, that's great. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your current work. So what are you working on now, or what have you finished recently? Perhaps Stephanie?
Oh, you want to start with me?
Oh, you're good. You're on.
Okay, all right, okay. Well, I've had a lifelong obsession with rugs, and I thought I would share some photographs of my pandemic weaving, what I've been doing just recently. So I am going to share some photographs, right? So let me see if I can do this. Share screen. Is that right? No, not share screen. Yes?
Share photos.
Wait a second.
You have share content, and it should be photos as an option.
I see share screen.
Try that.
Okay. It says only you can do it. Oh, photos, there it goes. Nope, I got it. I got it. Okay. Now, show. Okay. So I do have some photographs that I'll start with. Okay.
Okay.
So let's see if I can do this. I hit it. Okay.
Oh,
Can
that
you
looks
see
like it's
that now?
working. Yes, go ahead.
All right. So I was weaving croak broad wool croak broad when this when the pandemic started. And so I've been, oh boy, I wonder if I can continue. I don't.
Yeah, you
see
should
my-
just swipe to the left.
Nope, it's not doing it. Let me go back.
Okay.
All right, let me see photos.
You have to
Photos.
select each photo that you want to share.
Ah, okay, that's why. All right, I'm so sorry that I'm taking up your time. Okay, I'm gonna do them all.
Okay.
Good, I see what you're saying. I'm. Okay, I have 22 photos and I'll try to go through them quickly. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Done. Okay, now that should go. All right.
Perfect.
So I started with wool crook rug. This is one of those rugs, like I said to Roy, where you construct. It's weft-faced weaving and it takes forever, but it's so much fun. It's only 3 harnesses. I am using a very thick warp, which is a trick that I learned from a Scandinavian weaver, where I am using 4 bundles of 6 threads for my weft. So they're bundled into 6s, and it makes a much thicker, heavier rug. I really enjoy doing it. It takes forever. Then I received a request from an alpaca farmer to weave a large, it was a 9x10 alpaca rug with her fleece, with her yarn. So this is my glimocra. This is the Papa Bear. And Roy, you mentioned the idea of a trapeze. The glimocra has its own trapeze. I don't have to set up a different one for it. I can just go right over the back. So this is the chains of warp going on to Papa Bear. Papa Bear is so large that you move the beater forward and your harnesses back, and you go inside the loom and you sit inside of it. There's doors at each end so you can walk into your loom. So that's me threading it. You can see that it is it's a counterbalance loom. It's very simple, but it has hanging lambs, floating lambs, I think they call them, so that it really balances your harnesses beautifully. I love working with this loom. So this is the rug that I am weaving with what they call core spun. It's the leftovers, the not so good part of the alpaca fleece that they would normally throw away. And instead they spin around a core of cotton yarn, and it creates a very big fluffy rug. It took a lot of time to figure out how to do this. She sent me a lot of different bumps, and I had to put them in order and play around with them and lay everything out until I had exactly what I wanted. But I was pleased with this rug. There was some leftover, and so I did another couple of rugs for her. Then each summer, I dye with indigo. I'm a natural dyer. I don't really know how to do chemical dyeing. So I fell in love with indigo when I was studying at the State Teachers College for Household Arts in Oslo, in Norway. And I've been doing it ever since. The pieces that you see are mostly my granddaughters. I've been teaching them how to do shibori. But what I do, you can see my pieces of cloth. I weave with cloth that I've dyed with indigo. So this is actually a stretch of fabric, but I use old sheets, I use old curtains, whatever I can get my hands on that's cotton or linen. I will dye up in the summertime outside in the backyard, and then I'll cut it and weave it into rugs and do shibori with my granddaughters for fun. I'm sorry this picture is not great. It doesn't really capture the colors, but this is a rag rug. I put on a log cabin warp, which is still on one of my Makumbers. And it is, the lighter color is actually a duck green. and the darker color is a smoky blue. They're Maysville cotton warps. One of the things that I always try to do is use American fibers. So I use Maysville cotton. I use recycled fibers. I do a lot of recycling of my rag just because I don't know where fabric comes from when you buy it in the store. So this is what I'm doing now. This is the same warp, and I'm just playing around with this log cabin warp, which is lots of fun using my indigo up. That's actually a better color representation. And I do this, I do small rugs to sell, but also to create ideas for myself for doing larger rugs, which I hope someday I will do for my own home. This is another indigo rug, and I've paired it. The lighter color is actually indigo, which I dye striated. I try not to do it perfectly, so you get that mottled look. And this is what we call pick and pick. Then the other thing that I've been doing recently that I'm having a lot of fun with is a local fiber farmer who owns Shetland sheep asked me if I would weave blankets for her. This is a modified monk's belt, and it's the back and front of the same blanket. The blanket's about 52 by 86, and it's got a wonderful drape to it. So I'm enjoying working with her because we're designing together. I'm doing sampling for her with her yarn, and then we're choosing a pattern together. She is not a weaver. She's not a spinner. This is the second blanket that I've done for her. And I'm going to do a gray warp. And then this is more of my indigo. I love croque broad so much, but I love indigo rag. So I'm trying to do, I'm starting to do rag croque broad, which is a lot of fun. I think you can see a more of a detail. The blue actually is not as dark as it looks in there. It's more of it's a paler indigo. So I'm just carrying through my indigo for the winter. And I had to show this because I've been teaching my granddaughters to weave and to do shibori. And this is my 12-year-old granddaughter. She's tall enough now to weave on a Makumber. So she did this as her first rag rug on a Makumber. And there's a detail of it. By the way, Megan, it already sold. I put it on the website, and one of my alpaca farmers in Oregon that I weave for, she bought it. Isn't that great?
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I think that's the end of my slide.
Excellent. Okay, so we actually have a question from a viewer, from Mary. Do the rug weavers ever add weights to the beater bar, such as metal plates?
I have done that. I got a very heavy piece of metal from Home Depot, and I had a friend drill holes into it and then drill it and put it at the bottom of the beater bar for a Leclerc. It works well, but I still think the Leclerc is, I think the weight of the tension of the warp would eventually warp the warp beam and the breast beam.
That's an interesting question for me because I just faced this issue with needing to weight my beater. And my problem was that my loom is new. I put it together myself 4 years ago. The wood is beautiful, and I do not have the heart to drill holes in it to put a metal bar in it. So I started doing research, and I came up with an idea, and I went to Dick's Sporting Goods and bought ankle weights, and they wrap around the the beater bar, and I can add up to like 15, 20 pounds, which is really all I need I'm starting a rug shortly. And that will be the first time I've weighted it. That's an interesting question. I cannot bring myself to drill a hole in this. It's foolish, I know, but whatever.
I think weavers fall into two camps, right? And there's ones who see their looms purely as machines, and they'll make any kind of modification, drill holes, write on it. And there's others like you who really don't have the heart, who see them as, you know, beautiful, beautiful objects.
I mean, this thing arrived in 5 boxes, about 250 pounds from Sweden, but then it goes to Oregon first. And I took a week of my own time. I did it by myself. And I'm the type that cannot hang pictures on walls correctly. So this was a very big deal for me. And so it's my baby, and I cannot put a hole in it.
Well,
Excellent.
I'm glad we're not, you know, not showing looms today, because ours are in the opposite category. We have never, I think I might have had one brand new loom in my life. But everything is vintage. Most of them are from the Garment Center back in the 80s when I was working there. So I mean, these are old vintage looms, and they look like vintage looms. The good thing is that they have lasted all this time, and they're in great shape, but they don't look that pretty. So yeah, we actually, God forbid, but I think Richard's actually put duct tape on some of them. So
Point counterpoint.
yeah.
Contrary to Cecilia's grim tale, we had a studio in Crown Point, New York, up in the foothills of the Adirondacks for 10 years when we left New York. And one summer, I took the loom that I am now working on, and I totally took it apart, sanded it, re-oiled it, and reassembled it. And it's with as much affection as I could muster. And it is my favorite loom now, and I'm working on it today.
So staying with the Makumbers, we actually have a live stream question from Pat, which is, how tall do you have to be to use a Makumber? And I'm going to give that a little context, which is different looms do suit different body types, right? You know, if you are long in the leg versus long in the torso, a certain loom may or may not fit you. So can you talk about the Makumbers?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we have an open studio. So very often we get families with young kids, and, you know, I kind of take a look at the kid. I always want to encourage them to sit down and try it if they were that interested, and a lot of them are. But until they're, I don't know, 5 foot, I mean, they just don't have the strength, number one, to put down, because usually we've got at least 8 harness set up. So there's a little bit of weight involved. The harnesses on a Makumber are all metal. So generally I just take a look at the kid, but usually they're like at least 10. I mean, so what's that,
Right.
5 foot or?
And if they're younger and shorter, we'll also have them stand at the loom
Mhm.
and depress the jack pedals if they're really adamant about wanting to try it.
Mhm.
And that works fine for a short duration.
Yeah. But I think as a general rule, if you're an adult looking to buy a loom, I think you should just try them all out, you know, figure out, you know, contact guild members and just say, hey, can I try out your Makumber or Glamacra or whatever it is, because it, like Megan said, it is a very personal thing.
Yeah, Lily, my granddaughter, is 5'1", and she was just the right size to use my Makumber, but she can't use my Glamacra because the breast beam is much higher. I also have smaller looms. I have a Dorset, and I have a little HD portable, and that's great for kids learning on. My daughter, who is a little person, is only 4'1". The only loom that she can use of mine is the little HD.
How about our sample Makumber?
So I did not warn you that this was going to be a confessional, but I'm going to ask each of you to confess something now, which is, what is your biggest weaving disaster? So think for a moment, and let's see who is willing to confess first.
Oh, I got one. When I first started, I mean, this is way back, but I was, my first job out of college was at a knitting store in New York City. And I had gotten a loom at some point also. I'm not quite sure of all the details, but at any rate, I brought home this project that I was going to do on my loom using knitting wool, the little balls of fluff. And of course, knitting wool has the stretch in it. It is not appropriate for weaving. So that work was a disaster. I think I had, I tend to like jump in with both feet on projects. So I think this was, 500 ends of this blue spongy knitting yarn. I don't know how many yards I had made it, but needless to say, it was a complete disaster and I was not able to weave with it at all. I couldn't get it under, as soon as I put it under any kind of tension, it snapped. So it was a real disaster. But then as a professional weaver, I think when Chenille first started getting really strong, I did a series of Chenille twills, loose twills, crazy, right? So those came back to me in short order. I had sent them to a store and the store had sold them to customers and they were coming back. Luckily, I think I only had done a very small line of them, so I didn't get a lot back, but that was a learning lesson as far as like, make sure you test market a new style, a new yarn, especially, when you're dealing with it in a commercial sense, you don't want the stores to have to deal with that kind of hassle. So those are the two things that come to mind first.
For the viewers, can you explain why a loose twill with chenille is not a great idea?
Because chenille has a life of its own. It starts to worm is what happens. I mean, unless you're really beating the heck out of it, and I mean super tight set and super tight picks per inch, it will just kind of grow. Chenille grows. It really does do that. So my experience has always been to do a very tight plain weave, like depending on the yard, how many yards per pound the chenille is, but our chenille is 15 ends per inch and about 15 picks per inch in a plain weave. And that holds up really well. I've had customers come back to the shows 30 years later wearing the same scarf, which kind of, it's a little ragged on the fringe and so forth. It's not always the best looking scarf, but they cannot part with it. So it's like, okay, fine. Glad I made it so well, but I think it's time for a new color.
I have a couple confessions I can make. One is technical, having to do with the loom. The other has to do with tailoring and customer service. I have about 1,000 ends that I have to thread on my loom, and I had a complicated setup and did the whole thing wrong and had to rip it all out and start all over again, not paying attention to the progression of my heddles and so forth. 16 harness setup. The customer thing, I got ambitious about being appreciated for some fabric I had woven, and a difficult person to fit wanted me to make jackets for him. And of course, I was not a tailor. I have not been trained. I took measurements that I thought were accurate, and of course they were all wrong, and the customer hated the garment. It did not fit properly, sent it back, and it was a long process of finally returning his money and eating the product, which I was never able to sell.
Oh, okay. Well, we can't end on that note. We have some gift giving occasions coming up, right? We have the holidays. So I want to know what you think makes the perfect handwoven gift. Who would like to start? Roy?
I learned this from being at the Guild show a number of years, that the item that seems to sell the most are towels, because the person you're going to gift it to is not going to be wearing it, and you don't have to match your towel to your kitchen decor necessarily. So I think it seems to me that what I've seen from the show is that towels seem to be the easiest thing to buy and to gift.
I think scarves are a great one. I think people love to give scarves to people. It's another good one.
I agree with both of those comments, and I'm also going to just add, because of Zoom, scarves can make or break your outfit. You could be wearing your pajamas and put a scarf on there, and you are set for your 9 o'clock meeting with your coffee. And the other thing that Roy said about towels is so true too. I think people are buying homes. We're all home much more. Why not use something beautiful for your everyday chores?
I just have to add that the best thing I ever gifted myself from the Guild Show was one of Richard and Cecilia's jackets, because I bought a sports jacket from them. I went for it. It was about 3 years ago. That was the best gift I gave myself, but no one else could have chosen it but me.
I'm glad it wasn't 15 years ago when I was still learning about construction and fitting.
Excellent. All right. And that is all the time we have today. I'd like to thank my guests at this open studio session, and thank you to everyone who watched today. Don't forget to check out the Weavers listed at www.hmwg.org/show and enter the door prize drawing. Thank you, everybody.